Okay. Hello there, everyone. Welcome to the 411 Ground and Pound MMA podcast. I am your host, Robert Winfree. We are your weekly look into the wide, wacky, wonderful world of mixed martial arts. Let me start this episode by apologizing for this going up a lot later than normal. My weekend was just very busy. That's not just the coverage I had Saturday and Sunday, which I did. That was a lot of stuff. I got done covering AEW's Dynasty event on Sunday, and I was just done. I had nothing in me to record. So, have to sneak it in a little bit at a different time. Monday, which is when I'm recording this. And I have to apologize and thank you for your patience with me on that respect. It would not have been a good show. I was done. I was so done. I had just been kind of hopping Friday, a little bit of Friday, and then Saturday was fairly busy. And then Sunday was actually fairly busy. I got up very early Sunday. A lot earlier than I usually get up. You don't care. It was just a really busy weekend, and by the time I kind of like rolled around towards 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock actually, give or take, on Sunday evening, I was just done. Normally, I don't mind recording at that time. I'll go for a couple of hours and we're good. But I was very done. So, apologies for this being a little bit later than usual. I thank you very much for your patience and your understanding on that respect. So on the agenda this evening, UFC on ESPN 65, warehouse fights. The reason I assume most of you are here is we are previewing UFC 314, which I will not actually be able to cover live. Um, that saddens me, but I have a thing I can't mess with on Saturday, so I will be able to. I will have a report. I can't do it live. Yeah, I'm a little annoyed by that, but some of the scheduling there is out of my hands. So we'll have a full preview for that today, and again, some news. There was some news. Nothing like earth-shattering, but there was definitely some news to go over. So, anything you can do to help the product, of course, like, comment, subscribe, star rating, written review, y'all know the drill. Okay, let's jump into it, shall we? UFC and ESPN 65, the prediction results, another 11-1. I changed two. Um, One I debated giving myself credit for. I'm not sure. I'm still uncertain about it. One I made the call fairly early after recording. The one I'm not sure about giving myself credit for is Ode Osborne and Gurule, 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 I believe is how they pronounced it. Where the emphasis is. Something about the way they kind of lined up when I saw them next to each other just made me go, yeah, I actually kind of like Osborne there. Which I was sweating that first round, but that one I'm not sure about. The one I have no qualms giving myself credit for. I rewatched Brito and Jonathan Pierce and went, yeah, Pat Sabatini's a lot more controlling than Pierce, gives you a lot less room to scramble, and isn't going to stick his neck into your ninja choke. And that's pretty much how that played out. So that one I don't feel bad at all. If you think I'm trying to fudge my numbers on Osborne, and let me know. I'll swap that one around. Let me throw an asterisk onto this card. And if I feel really bad about it, or if you guys kind of let me know that you think I'm being sketchy, I'll switch it from 11-1 to 10-2. That's not really a problem for me on that respect. As for the rest of the card, yeah. Did swap my pick because, we lost the fight between Kennedy Nzechukwu and Martin Bidet. Didn't mind picking Bidet on short notice for that one because the guy that stepped in is normally a light heavyweight. And I don't think he fought badly, but he was also only like 9-0, I think. And that junior, normally down a weight class, like, yeah, I'm okay going with Bidet there. Um, yeah, the rest of this wasn't terribly. This wasn't a very hard card to pick as a general rule. Again, going back to switching to Sabatini was just like rewatch each of their last fights, the last couple of fights. The one in particular for Brito that I needed to double check was the Pierce one because that was the one where he was in some real wrestling related trouble, and he pulled it out, and good on him. But Sabatini was not going to give him those same opportunities. Sabatini does a lot more control instead of scrambling and riding, and that's just really tough for Brito to deal with. So yeah, other than that, not a whole lot there. So oh, we did lose the Daniel Santos and who was it? David Grant. Right. Yeah, that medical issues for Santos. He never even weighed in. And yeah, that was kind of that. So let's get into the fights in particular. Oh, sorry. So that was 11 and 1, second 11 and 1 in a row. Now 107 and 36 and 1. There's a draw there. Yeah. So I'm actually feeling pretty good about that. I'm feeling pretty good about this one. Okay. So the fights themselves. Main event, Lerone Murphy defeats Josh Emmett via unanimous decision. Two 48-47s, one 49-46. I was 49-46, but I don't think 48-47 is wrong. Josh Emmett, still dangerous. Got power, but Lerone Murphy has really good defense. And he's got, a good guard position, good movement. He did a lot of very good moving around the cage. Never let himself really get cornered for any length of time. Good work with the kicks at range. Just a really disciplined, intelligent performance that neutralized almost everything Josh Emmett likes to do. Pretty big takedown from Emmett in the second round, actually. Like, just got him way up in the air and then kind of one of the higher amplitude takedowns I've seen. I'm sure I've seen. There's others that have been higher, like Daniel Cormier throwing Dan Henderson around. Cormier, when he threw Gustafsson around, that might have been higher technically based on the relative heights of those guys, but was a nice takedown from Emmett. Some good body kicks from Murphy. Lerone Murphy is just really hard to beat. He's not a very exciting fighter, and I don't mean that as a negative. But he fights very tactically. If you're a fight nerd, there's a lot of interesting stuff that he does. His stance switching is very deliberate. He doesn't just do it to do it. His setups are nice. The way he feints, he changes rhythm very nicely. There's a lot really, really good about his game. Unfortunately, he's undefeated. His only blemish is a draw that he had in his UFC debut with Zubaira Tukhugov. But he's also got like what, one finish in the UFC? Two. Yeah, he TKO'd Ricardo Ramos and then a little bit later knocked out Makwan Amirkhani. But and look, I'm not saying it's easy to finish guys like Edson Barboza, Dan Ige, and Josh Emmett. Dude, Ilya Topuria didn't finish Josh Emmett. So I'm not sitting here throwing shade at this fight, but you're dealing with a guy who is very good, very, very smart, very, very well-rounded. He can fight pretty much everywhere. But his fights tend to be very... When I say measured, I don't mean that... Because there's a way you can be measured and still be exciting. But he is very, very measured, very calculated. And he's just... There's not a lot of excitement around him, and it's very understandable why. Again, I'm not trying to throw shade at the guy, because he's doing really good work. Dude, beating Josh Emmett as cleanly as he did is difficult. Like Topuria did it better, but, that's Ilya Topuria. Being able to be that clean, he came out of this fight barely having been hit cleanly in the whole thing. A lot of good blocking, a lot of good footwork, just a lot of good fighting in general, but he kind of, he's not as wrestle heavy as this, but he's going to have the John Fitch problem. And I don't say that to, again, I'm not saying that he's a wrestler who, because he does wrestle, but the problem with the John Fitch style of fighting, and I don't, again, this is not about wrestling, this is about like your relationship to the UFC and to the sport. You can have success just winning fights. You can fight for a title just winning fights. But if your fights are not all that memorable, if they don't generate a lot of crowd support, and they don't generate a lot of excitement, you'll get one shot at the belt. And look, Movsar Evloev has the same problem. I think it's a little bit unfair, but he should probably be fighting for the belt instead of Sean O'Malley. And I might talk more about that later. Let me do it now, just for the sake of not having to do it later. The UFC announced that Sean O'Malley is getting a rematch with Merab Dvalishvili for the bantamweight belt. Here's the thing. People are not very excited for this fight. O'Malley has done nothing since losing the belt. Merab actually defended it against Umar, and even though I scored that for Umar, there's just not much appetite for it this time around. Is kind of the reaction that I've seen. Now, the reactions I've seen are not, fully representative, but realistically it should be Movsar. He's the more deserving contender than O'Malley by a non-trivial margin. But the UFC doesn't like Movsar Evloev. They don't like his fighting style. They don't like the number of decisions he has, which is a lot. I think he's only had decisions in the UFC. So they're going to throw up every roadblock they can, and we'll get to what's happening with Evloev in a minute or two later on in the show. And if he ever does get a shot at the belt, if he loses, he's never getting another one. John Fitch won a bunch of fights, got a title shot, lost it pretty badly. Let's be fair, that was George St. Pierre. He never even sniffed another title shot after that. I think the closest he came was maybe if he'd beaten Johnny Hendricks when they fought, he could have kind of forced the issue, but again, it's not just that he never fought for the belt again, he never got close to fighting for the belt again. And Lerone Murphy is going to find himself in a similar position. I don't think he's going to fight for the belt next, but he's going to fight another highly ranked guy. And with another win, he could be the next guy. I mean, there's some stuff to figure out at featherweight. But you just are going to run into this problem where if the fans don't connect with you as either a personality or you're fighting, that's a hard road to hoe. And he might still do it, and I am not saying he needs to turn into Justin Gaethje. I'm really not saying that. I'm making an observation about what I think his future will be if nothing really changes. But he's a very good fighter. I like watching him fight. I'm not trying to be down on the guy. He's going to be due a fairly big fight after this one. That's 2 main events in a row. It's 2 ranked guys. It's 2 known guys in Danny Ige and now Josh Emmett. He's gonna get somebody fairly close to the top. He could fight. What do you think? He could fight the loser of Yair Rodriguez and Patricio Pitbull. Something like that. That's the kind of stuff he's gonna be looking at next, or should be looking at next. Whether or not he actually gets it, who knows? Josh Emmett. He's a nice guy to have on the roster, but he's also 40. unless he chooses to hang it up, I'm not calling for it. I think he can still compete at the UFC level. But I do think he's a little bit on the downside. And again, you're 40 years old, man. God bless. I'm coming up on 40, and I couldn't do half of what less than half of what he does. Like, I am just kind of pathetic. So, he'll probably knock out a few other guys like ranked below him, but I think he's going to settle into more of a upper-ish level gatekeeper is kind of what I think he's going to do for the next little bit. Co-main event, Pat Sabatini defeats Joe Anderson Brito via unanimous decision, 2 30-26s and a 30-27. Yeah, Sabatini just blanked him. Just was able to get him down, get to half guard, real tight control. Peppered in more ground and pound as things went on. Brito's wall walking just wasn't quite there. A lot of what Brito does is predicated on the assumption that you're going to play a game with him that allows him space to move. That you'll outposition him, but in generating momentum and a little bit of space, he will find ways to re-engage instead of simply being controlled. Sabatini doesn't play that game. He is all about control, more so than getting to a moderate control position and then not caring if you try to keep moving because he can inflict damage along the way. He'd really rather just hold you down in half guard, really control you, and then beat you up a little bit, soften you up, and kind of just build from there. So, pretty solid win for Sabatini. Chong Ho Lee defeated Cortavius Romeus via TKO, punches, elbows. 3:48 of the second. Romeus missed weight. Never good. Lee is still a little bit lopsided in his skill set. He'll throw hands, but he's not. There's a lot of sophistication that's missing there. His grappling, they kind of jokingly call him the Korean Khabib. He's not quite Khabib. Even like Khabib at this point in his UFC career, he's not quite that. But you can see a little bit where the inspiration comes from, so good win for him. Brad Tavares defeated Gerald Meerschaert via unanimous decision, 30-27 across the boards. Somebody called Brad Tavares the anti-Gagey. So, fun fact about Brad Tavares. His debut in the UFC was in 2010. 2010. In his entire UFC career, he has 2 wins by finish. He knocked out old Phil Baroni in 2011, and yes, in 2011, Phil Baroni was old. Then, in 2000, where is it? The yacht going? In 2018. So he goes 7 years. January of 11 to April of 18. So yeah, he's a little over 7 years between finishes. And then he hasn't finished anybody since. He's had so many UFC fights. He's had 26 UFC fights. You know how many bonuses he's had in 26 UFC fights? The goose egg. The big zero. I'm not trying... Now, look. Brad Tavares is a good fighter. But, the joke there kind of is, like, this fight was guaranteed to go the distance. You put Gerald Meerschaert in there against a guy who is almost impossible to take down. Yeah. Not a whole lot here. Flyweight Ode Osborne defeated Louis Gouroulet via TKO. Punches mostly 154 the second. Pretty good first round for Gouroulet, but Osborne got he got his distance kind of dialed in more, and then slipped a punch, cracked him with a counter. Osborne needed that win real badly. When he's on, he actually has a lot of skill, but he has really struggled to find consistency. And then we had Therese Finney defeating Robert Valentin via split decision. There were 2 29-28s for Finney, which is what I scored it, and then a 30-27 for Valentin from boxing referee Tony Weeks. Okay, this fight sucked. Let me start with that. This fight sucked. So, Weeks doing the 30-27 for Valentin thing almost like as a protest to the fight, I appreciate on a like, hey, here's a protest level. It's a terrible scorecard. Valent, look, man, Finney landed, I think, like 5 significant strikes the whole fight, if that. Did a lot of wrestling, did a lot of holding against the fence, but Valentin's, sort of strikes while trying to defend were not exactly compelling. They were in the third, and I don't think he really got taken down in the third. So this fight sucked. This is actually going on my list of worst fights of the year. In fact, I will add that right now. Worst fight of the year possibilities. Therese Finney versus from UFC and ESPN 65. Yeah. Fight sucked. Yeah, I don't have a whole lot else to say about that terrible fight. On the prelims, Diani Barbosa defeated Diana Belbicha via arm triangle choke, 4:13 of the first. Little bit of striking from Barbosa, then got a takedown and is much better on the ground. Reese McKee, my only one I got wrong here, defeated Daniel Frunza via TKO doctor stoppage due to cuts between rounds 1 and 2. These are a little bit of a... Dude, Frunza got dropped like 3 times, then kind of rallied and started throwing back and actually landed some decent punches, but his right eye was kind of messed up and he had a real bad split lip, like Robbie Lawler, real bad split lip. Doctor had to stop it, fair enough. Reese McKee's first win, finally. Decent little one-round fight for what it was. Loma Lukbunmi defeated Estela Nunes via unanimous decision, a 30-27 and 2 29-28. Nunes did the, what? How could they not score that for me after doing like nothing to win? Not a very good fight, unless she really thought she had something going with a straight ankle lock at one point. This wasn't a great fight, but she didn't do a whole lot. Bantamweight Victor Henry defeated Pedro Falcao via unanimous decision, 29-28 across the board. This was a good little fight. Victor Henry's a fun fighter. Keeps a real high pace, even for bantamweight. Pretty good at most ranges. Falcao, good wrestler. They kind of got after it a little bit, There was no fight of the night. Again, I actually might have given it to Henry and Falcao. Heavyweights Martin Bidet defeated Uran Satibaldiev, who 9-0, normally a light heavyweight, stepped in on short notice. And you know what? Satibaldiev did not look bad. This was not a very good fight. But he was up against it in a lot of ways. He was they weighed Bidet on fight night. He weighed 266 on the scale. Apparently, the day of the fight, he was 280 something. So Satibaldiev gave up 60 pounds on fight night, give or take, because he weighed 220. Yeah, just up against it in a lot of respects. And I fully expect Satibaldiev to get another shot. And I want to see what he looks like more at light heavyweight. And kicking everything off, Talita Alankar defeated Vanessa Demopoulos via unanimous decision, 230-27 to 30-26. I missed most of this fight, and I haven't gone back and rewatched it. Alankar just vastly superior grappling to Demopoulos, and Demopoulos just really struggled to get anything going from what I could see. So that was the card. There is a report in the MMA Zone of 411mania.com. Go give it a read if you're so inclined. And for anyone who did follow my live coverage, thank you very much. I appreciate the heck out of it. Your bonuses, again, no fight of the night, which I do think kind of did Henry and Falcao a little dirty. So instead, they just did the, hey, did you get a finish? You get a bonus. So Chung Ho Lee, Ode Osborne, Diani Barbosa, and Reese McKee all got bonuses. Needs to be said, this is our 4th event in a row without a fight of the night bonus being handed out. The record is 5. It's from much further back in the day. And it says a lot about sort of the quality of what's being put out. That for 4 events in a row, the UFC has looked at the fights and went, you know what? No, there wasn't a fight of the night. I don't know. But, people get mad if you call it Apex slop. The UFC is they're kind of phoning this in. That might change in the future. There's some rumblings that Netflix is not interested in the weekly UFC product. Sorry about that. So, I'll talk about this very, very briefly, then we'll move on. So, again, whether that changes or not remains to be seen. Whether these, again, this is kind of like rumblings and rumored reports, whether that is accurate remains to be seen. But if there is an entity that doesn't need the week-to-week UFC slop, Netflix has plenty of its own slop. It does not need the UFC weekly slop. They might be looking at more at, what, 4 to 6 events a year. And when you do that, they're just really going to go bring us good stuff. So that's possible. But I mean, look, there's a bunch of stuff the UFC tries to offer that Netflix doesn't want or need. They don't need The Ultimate Fighter. Nobody does. They don't need Road to UFC. And again, Netflix has more than enough space, more than enough stuff to fill the digital shelves. They don't need to go, hey, here's crappy fights every week. They don't need to pay for it. So, once again, the deal might change. Who knows? But if the UFC is looking to still do basically one card every week, they might need to find some other home for the weekly warehouse fights. We'll see. But again, more on that kind of as it develops. That's just because this is all just kind of rumblings. I didn't want to make a full, talking point out of it. But that's kind of the rumors going around right now. So more on that as more becomes available. Anyway. Okay, moving on. Let's get into UFC 314, shall we? In Miami, which is a choice, not even a bad one. The UFC at this point is mostly taking money from local governments, overcharging for tickets, my opinion, and kind of looking to be like a status thing, like, hey, if you're wealthy, then show up at the fights. And if we're not going to put on a card that's actually even remotely justifying the ticket price that we charge, we throw it in the Apex. And Miami does have a fair amount of wealth floating around. So, main event for the featherweight title, vacant for the moment, Alexander Volkanovski, former champion, and Diego Lopez. Logically, I should pick Lopez. I really should. He's younger. He's very dynamic. He's very high energy. He's very dangerous. He's got good power in his hands. He's a dynamite grappler, dynamite jiu-jitsu. Here's a couple of the things. Here's why I'm picking Volkanovski. 1, a little bit sentimentality. I'm not going to deny it. 2, Lopez's defense has gotten him in trouble at times, and Volkanovski has a very good jab. I think that's going to be a problem for Lopez. Not one he can't overcome, but that's going to be a problem for him. 2, it's not even close that Volkanovski is the best fighter Lopez has ever fought. The next closest might be Brian Ortega, who was coming off a really long layoff and has been way up and down. again, almost comical how much better Volkanovski is than the opposition Diego Lopez has faced thus far. 5 rounds. We've never seen Lopez go 5 rounds. Not in the UFC. He did once outside of it. Yeah, this would have been in 2019. So again, before he's in the UFC, he does have one 5 round fight that goes the full distance. Um, so there's some things here that give me a little bit of pause. Volkanovski being a little bit older, he would buck the trend. He would be the first guy, lightweight or lower, to win a UFC title fight after the age of 35. And realistically, again, if you want to be, you should be picking Lopez here in a lot of respects. I don't know how Volkanovski's chin is. Now, the knockouts to, you know, on short notice, the best guy in the world in Islam Makhachev, and then a quick turnaround for a guy with real power and real good delivery systems like Ilia Topuria, who then went on to knock out Max Holloway, if there's any doubts about his, actual power and whatnot. That's a bad stretch. It is somewhat mitigated by the level of opposition. Again, who did it? Getting knocked out by some of those. Look, you eat a head kick from Topuria, like, yeah, you probably go, or excuse me, from Makhachev. I'm not going to hold that too much against you. And Topuria just, bricks in his hands at featherweight, man. You knock out Max Holloway, like that's something special. This will be a better indicator of whether or not his chin is really like going or gone, because Lopez has good power, but he's not those guys. Volkanovski's defense is usually pretty solid. He's a good grappler. He's a good counter grappler. And he also has a real gift for depressing a fight, for like lowering the output without making it like boring. He's not in frantic fights ever. He fought Max Holloway 3 times. You have to be real. You have to be able to fight really measured at a high pace, but measured. And I think Lopez still leans a little bit too much on the wildness. So this might be if you pick Lopez, I think there's very good reason to do it. I will not be shocked one little bit if he wins, not even a little bit. But I'm gonna pick Volk, and it's probably the last time I will do so if he loses. Certainly at the title level. All right. Yeah. And again, I'm probably going to be very wrong and be very sad after this fight, but I am prepared for that. Co-main event: Michael Chandler and Paddy Pimblett. I look. I want to pick Michael Chandler here just because Paddy kind of annoys me. But Chandler gives up his back a little bit too often. Chandler in the UFC, while he's had some really good fights, has also been kind of a bust. I mean, his only UFC wins are what? Dan Hooker and Tony Ferguson. Now, in fairness, his other opponents are Charles Oliveira twice, Justin Gaethje, and Dustin Poirier. Like, okay, couldn't get it done against those guys. But, that's still kind of where we are with that. Paddy's defense is a problem. His striking in general is not great. It's coming along, but for a guy where he is in his career, it should be a lot further, objectively. I'm not going to be surprised if Chandler wins. Not at all. Because Pimblett's defense is just... It's a problem, and that's a bad problem to have against Chandler. But Chandler's getting a little bit old, and I think Paddy probably is able to get this one done. But, these are two just deeply unlikable people as far as MMA personalities go. Featherweight next, Bryce Mitchell and Gian Silva. I've gone back and forth on this one, believe it or not. Here's the deal. The odds are pretty heavily with Silva, almost like minus 300 on average. Silva has had some wrestling problems in the past. Charles Jourdain had some success wrestling him. And Bryce Mitchell is still a really good wrestler and grappler. Mitchell's chin is a little bit dicey. And when Bryce Mitchell is on the back foot, a lot of his game struggles. A lot. I don't know where his chin is. Look, yeah, his only 2 losses, okay? Let's be real about Bryce Mitchell, who, again, not here to advocate for his worldview or him as a human being. His only losses in the UFC are to Ilia Topuria and Josh Emmett. He's beaten some good guys. He beat the crap out of Edson Barboza. He's coming off the knockout win over Kron Gracie. There's a lot that's actually pretty good about his game. But if you look at all those fights, anytime he winds up on the back foot, anytime things aren't going his way, he really struggles. Now, getting him to that point where he starts struggling is not the easiest thing in the world, but it's a thing. Silva's got real power. I think he comes out of a very good camp. But there's a lot of people here looking at some of the way Silva struggled at times against, Jourdain. Stuff like that. Did okay against Weston Wilson. But there's reason to look at this and go, Bryce Mitchell can absolutely win this fight. It's a very real thing. I'm still going with Silva, but I would not be comfortable with the odds. If I'm sitting on having to pay out, 2-1, 2.5-1 on Bryce Mitchell in this fight, I would be sweating that like a mother. Featherweight again next, Yair Rodriguez and Patricio Pitbull. Nice to see Pitbull finally get to the UFC. I've been real up and down and back and forth on Yair Rodriguez. So he's coming off of a 2-fight losing streak. He won an interim belt in 23, then a couple of months later got brutalized by Alexander Volkanovski. That was not an especially close fight. He takes almost a year off, then comes back and gets arm triangled, actually a really nice kaiju choke, by Brian Ortega. That was February of last year, so he's taking another year off. Yair Rodriguez is dynamic. A lot of what he does looks like it really hurts, but he struggles after the first round. And guys who can just be really methodical against him have a fair amount of success. Pitbull, coming off a win over Jeremy Kennedy. He'd lost 2 in a row before that, a decision to Sergio Pettis, and then got stopped by Chihiro Suzuki. He did have the loss to AJ McKee. He avenged that, but look, if you want to pick Yair just because Pitbull is 37, has been fighting forever, the odds are actually with Rodriguez. The layoff here is giving me pause. And I'm not sure how I'm going to go about this. I don't think Pitbull is completely washed. the best version of Pitbull would win this fight against the best version of Yair Rodriguez. If this were 5 rounds, I might be more inclined to lean towards Rodriguez, actually. I think he holds up well cardio-wise over 5. I just think like the best night of Yair Rodriguez's career was his fight with Max Holloway, which he lost. But he gave Holloway some problems, and don't forget that. I'm going to go with Pitbull. Um, the layoff for Yair and some of his inconsistency in general is just kind of nagging at the back of my brain. Light heavyweight next, Dominic Reyes and Nikita Krylov. Who could possibly care? Krylov been a bit up and down in the UFC. I mean, he had a good run at one point, then lost to Misha Serkinov, and then just said, like, I'd like my release. Won 4 in a row outside the UFC, came back and lost to Jan Blachowicz, beat Ovince St. Preux, lost to Glover to share a split decision. I thought he won that one. Beats Johnny Walker, loses to Magomed Ankalaev, loses to Paul Craig. That was he made a weird call in that fight. Then stops Alexander Gustafsson very quickly because Gus is washed at that point. Beats Volkan Oezdemir and beats Ryan Spann. He's coming off the Spann win. And then you've got Reyes, who really, credit to him, dug himself out of a hole. He was deep in a hole after Ryan Spann knocked him out with a jab, basically. Took some time off, came back, beat Dustin Jacoby, coming off a win over Anthony Smith. Smith is just beyond washed. He shouldn't have been in there in that fight, and I think everyone admits that. So this is really kind of the acid test for Reyes. Like, okay, are you actually back? You actually going to do something here? And for Krylov, are you going to hang out in kind of the mid card of light heavyweight? I think a lot of people are leaning towards Reyes here. The odds are actually with Krylov. This is usually the point at which Krylov stumbles, though. He's got some fights in a row, actually looking okay, and then things fall apart. That's kind of the pattern with him. But, Reyes did get a good win over Jacoby, but I can't take anything from that Smith fight. Like, what's there to take from that? All right. I'm going with Krylov. I'm still kind of I very rarely pick Dominic Reyes to win fights. That's a really good pay-per-view card, for the record. This is a really strong pay-per-view. I really hope it holds together. On the prelims, let's see, we have Dan Ige versus Sean Woodson. I like this fight, believe it or not. Ige, been around for a bit. He's only 33, but he's been with the UFC since 2018, and he's been busy. 2-fight losing streak at the moment, somewhat mitigated. Look, he's on a bit of a rough stretch in general. So let's go back to 21. So 2021, he loses to the Korean Zombie, loses to Josh Emmett, loses to Movsar Evloev, and we all kind of go, eh. Then he knocks out Damon Jackson, beats Nate Landwehr, then he loses to Bryce Mitchell. Then he beats Andre Fili. Then he loses to Diego Lopez, but he comes off the couch basically for that fight. UFC 303. Coming off the loss to Lerone Murphy, and that was a bit more telling. Now, Murphy, as I talked about a little bit earlier, very good. But we got to kind of figure out whether Dan Ige is coming or going. And Sean Woodson is huge. He's 6'2" for featherweight. He's long. He's a good boxer. His only UFC loss was to Julian Erosa. Coming off a win over Fournette. This is the best fighter that he's fought by a non-trivial margin. Dan Ige is a lot better than Charles Jourdain or Alex Caceres or Yusuf Zalal, who would be the other, that's not everyone he's fought in the UFC, but those are the better recognizable names. He's taken a non-trivial step up in competition here. Woodson's defense is a little bit iffy. He does the big man thing where he kind of will just lean back and doesn't move his head a lot in the pocket. Some of which is understandable when you're that tall, like actually moving a lot, like trying to bob and weave and whatnot when you're that tall just really puts you in danger. You have to, if you're that tall, your defense is different than if you're short. That's just how it is. Especially, like, depending on how you match up with. If you're a tall guy who doesn't know how to do those things, you got a problem because the first time you fight someone more similar to you, you wind up in real trouble. I've seen that a million times. Um, but Woodson, in this case, I mentioned, he's 6'2". Dan Ige is 5'7". If you want to do the math on that, he's Woodson is 7 inches taller. Right? 3, 5, yeah. Danny Ige has 71 inches of reach. Woodson has 78. Now, Danny Ige has good power, and he's probably good enough to navigate the distance in some general ways, but he's kind of up against it. I think what are the odds on this one? I gotta scroll back up because these are not linked. Odds are a little bit with Woodson. I actually agree with that. I'm gonna go with Woodson here. That's a close one though. Danny Ige's a real stiff test for your introduction to like the upper level of that division. Strawweight next, Yan Xiaonan and Virna Jandiroba. So Yan beat Tabitha Ricci. That was her rebound from losing the Zhang Wei Li fight where she should have been stopped in the first and should have been stopped in the second. The referee should have in the first is tough. Like I would have if I was the ref. Then the referee just botched she went unconscious at the end of the second, and you can't be saved by the bell like that from a choke. If you're out when the bell rings, you're done. And then, Zhang won the decision anyway, so technically beat her. Like, you can argue she beat her 3 times in that fight, but again, coming off the win over Tabitha Ricci, that was a nice little rebound win for Yan. And then Jandiroba, on a 4-fight winning streak, Angela Hill, Marina Rodriguez, Lupe Godinez, and Amanda Lemos. Jandiroba is a good grappler, got an okay clinch game. Jan's just kind of a tough out for most people in this division. Not unbeatable, but tough. The odds are with Jandiroba. I think they're overestimating her takedown game. It's not bad at all, but Yan has done a real good job of figuring out a lot of that. I mean, there were rounds where Zhang really struggled to get her down. I have slept on Jandiroba a bit in the past though, so I'm gonna go with Yan. I picked a lot of favorites here, mostly because I think they're gonna win, but may as well throw them. Lightweight. Okay, here's gonna be my sentimental pick: Jim Miller and Chase Hooper. Logically, it's Hooper. Let me just say that. He's a big favorite. He's a big favorite for a reason. Would I pick Jim Miller just to... You know what? No. I love Jim Miller. I really do. I'm rooting for him. I'm going to pick Hooper, and if Miller wins, I will be over the moon to get that wrong. Again, I love Jim Miller, but the age is catching up a little bit. Hooper's tall, long for the weight class, really good grappler in his own right. There was a time when I think this would have gone the other way, when Miller would have been the cagey, man strength veteran beating the younger, talented guy who just doesn't quite have everything you need to handle that. But I think Hooper's in a much better place now. Middleweight, Cedrikas Dumas and Michal Oleksiejczuk. I think I'm going to pick Oleksiejczuk here. Dumas has been... He's been way too up and down. And look, Oleksiejczuk is a little bit up and down as well, but I've not really been impressed with what Dumas brings to the table. I-E or E-I? O-L-E-K-S-I-E-J-C-Z-U-K. I did spell that right. Look at me go. Yeah, then on the early prelims, Darren Elkins and Julian Erosa. Yeah, I don't like that fight. Elkins won his last two, wins over TJ Brown and Daniel Pineda. Erosa, two-fight winning streak. Beat submissions over Ricardo Ramos and Christian Rodriguez. I don't know that I pick Elkins to win fights at this point, which might be a mistake on my part. Erosa's a pretty big favorite. Let me just say this. Elkins can win this fight. Erosa might succumb to just kind of what Elkins does generally. I'm going to pick Erosa, though, because, as I said, just picking Elkins at this point. Beating him is not easy, but everyone knows kind of what they have to do. Flyweights, Sumudarji and Mitch Raposo. Oh, look at this one. Do we have odds for this? I feel like we should. Oh, there it is. Okay. Those are the odds. The odds are with Sumudarji. Let me have a quick look at Mitch Raposo. Because he's fought at least once in the UFC. I think he's 9-2. Yeah, dropped his UFC debut to Andre Lima. Split decision. Okay. Lima's pretty good, so giving him a tough fight is nothing to sneeze at. And Sumudarji. 3-fight losing streak. Matt Schnell, Tim Elliott, and Charles Johnson. The Schnell loss is the only one that really kind of stands out there. Elliott, up at bantamweight, I'll forgive that loss. And then Charles Johnson is, struggles to get going enough to win fights, but to win decisions, but he's a good fighter as a general rule. I said the odds are with Sue. I will respect that in this case, but I don't remember Mitch Raposo's UFC debut in detail. Middleweights, Trishan Gore and Marco Tulio. Gore, done a little bit of stuff since coming to the UFC. He's 5-2. 2-fight winning streak. Wins over Josh Fremd and Antonio Tricoli. The Fremd win was pretty legit. Tricoli is not good. He shouldn't be in the UFC. Tulio is 13-1. 9-fight winning streak. Good UFC debut. I mean, he beat Ihor Potieria, which we're all grateful for, but is not actually the biggest endorsement of your skills. I might lean Tulio here. Oh, the odds are pretty heavily with him. Jeez. I wouldn't feel comfortable with this. Again, we're talking like minus 330 plus 250. So Tulio to Gore. I would not be that comfortable. I'm going to go with him, but I don't think those odds are an accurate reflection of that fight. Then kicking everything off, we have Nora Cornole and Haley Cowan. This is at women's bantamweight. So Cornole, 2-1 in the UFC, wins over Jocelyn Edwards and Melissa Mullins, and then she's coming off a split decision loss to Jacqueline Cavalcante. That should not have been split. Cowan has really struggled to find her footing in the UFC. She's 7-3. Oh, this is only okay. I remember I had talked about her before because she has had several UFC fights fall through. Then missed weight and lost a decision to Jamie Lynn Horth. In 23, had a bunch more fights fall out. This is probably Cornole, but yeah, going with Cornole. Yeah, I don't know enough about Cowan, like what she can actually do. So hopefully she's able to at least stay active going forward, even if she loses this. But that's the card. So my full report for that will be in the MMA Zone of 411 Mania after it's done. Again, I will not be able to watch that live. My apologies for not being able to do live coverage, but I will get something written up absolutely after the fact. Okay, don't need you anymore. Don't need you anymore. And there you are. Okay, let's get to some news then, shall we? So, Aaron Pico is signed with the UFC. Um, Happy to see him there. And for his debut, he gets stuck with Movsar Evloev, and they'll be fighting in the warehouse. Guys, I don't hate the fight. I would rather Evloev be fighting for the belt, personally. And I would rather Pico fight, maybe he would fight Sean O'Malley. There's other guys I'd rather Aaron Pico have fought in his debut. And I'd really rather he not make his debut in the warehouse in front of in front of like a dozen drunk guys. The Apex sucks. It is just terrible. It's just awful. At least, look, you can take studio shows and give them some personality and make them look okay on camera. I mean, you could argue that some of the best years from TNA wrestling were when they were just at Universal Studios. They had a studio, and they made it look and feel like a good place. You had a good crowd. Look, again, is it the biggest? No, of course not. But they gave it some personality, and they got, a good number of fans in there. And the UFC's like, nah, none of that. Again, studio shows aren't the end of the world. They're really not. But you got to put some effort into the production to not make it look like it's, two guys fighting in front of, again, a couple of drunkards in bleachers. And the UFC just wasn't willing to do that. So I don't hate the fight. Should be a pretty good one. But yeah, Aaron Pico in the UFC, thumbs up to that. Curious to see what he can do there. We're going to go quickly through the rest of these. I might be able to get out of here in decent time. So Derrick Lewis is probably going to main event the card on July 12th against Talison Teixeira. I don't know what we're doing here. At a time when a lot of people are, talking about how the UFC's content seems lazy, uninspired, how their booking is having problems, they're just going to throw another Derrick Lewis main event at people. I don't know what to tell you, guys. Now, that's not confirmed. It's kind of expected, though, so not looking forward to that one, but, well, there we are. Okay, minor thing here. I don't want to go too much into detail, but the PFL had their 2025 season kind of kickoff, finally. You know what? Let's give them credit. It didn't suck. They cleaned up a lot of the broadcast. They had some decent fights. Jason Jackson had a pretty decent fight. Let me double. I didn't write notes, so I'm going to have to look this up. And they had Sean O'Connell go on Ariel Helwani's show and do I think a lot of people are rooting against the PFL. Giving criticism doesn't mean you want it to fail. Can't stress this enough. I don't want the PFL to fail. I'd like them to succeed. But that doesn't mean I'm going to sit there and just say everything you do is great. I'd like a more competitive marketplace in MMA. That doesn't mean no matter what you do, I have to sit there and take it and say thank you. Thank you. No, I don't have to do that. I don't do that for pro wrestling either. I like it when pro wrestling has a more robust marketplace. It's better for the wrestlers. Drive some creative stuff. Like it's actually, again, it's a little bit better. That doesn't mean I have to sit here and, mindlessly clap for everything TNA did back in the day, or say AEW can do no wrong because I'm just glad they exist. I'm glad they exist. Doesn't mean I think everything they do is great. You know what? Same for the market leaders. I don't have to sit there and say, you know what, you're the market leader. You can do no wrong. Everything is good. I don't have to do that. I refuse to do that. If I think you're doing something stupid, I'll say it. So for the PFL, I want them to succeed. I really do. They did a lot of things wrong, and pretending otherwise is a mistake. Now, that said, we did get some decent fights out of this. I didn't care a whole lot about Logan Stoley and Joseph Luciano. Jesus Pinedo beating Adam Borix was kind of fun. Again, Jason Jackson is actually one of the highlights of some of the stuff they're doing, choking out Andrei Koreshkov. Kabulaev and Jeremy Kennedy was okay, not great. One of the things that kind of actually got a lot of notes coming out of this was Thad Jian defeating Mohamed Burkanov. Knocked him out in the first round. That was a nice finish from Jean. He's French, so that would be Jean. Let's see. Moderately impressed with Taehyun Kim and his win over Nathan Kelly. So, gonna give credit to PFL for their first event of 2025. I may not love their tournament format. I may think they overcomplicate things a lot. There's still a lot of stuff that makes me kind of roll my eyes. And I think Luke Thomas nailed this. The PFL doesn't have a relationship with the fans. Look, this is kind of starting to be a thing. So a few people have started taking note of the UFC being a bit of a conduit for younger men in particular towards more right-wing politics. I'm not going to preach about this, okay? Please don't lose your minds with me here. But that is a thing that people have started to finally pay attention to. It's been happening a bit for years, and there's reasons for it, some of which are completely understandable. Look, Dana White and the Fertittas were always anti-union, and I'm not going to get into the nuance and pros and cons of organized labor at every level. Generally, I think it's a good thing. There's certain sectors where I think it's not a good thing. And pretending that unions can't be exploitative of both their members and the businesses and whatnot is just ahistorical nonsense. It's why there's certain places, especially like New York, that won't actually hire a union because they're small enough that dealing with the unions is too big of a headache and causes them a great deal of financial problems. Bigger places, look, the bigger you are, the more I think that your workforce should probably have some kind of collective bargaining or, union agreement. I think people at Walmart probably should, because Walmart's huge. I don't think you necessarily need to be a union member to do minor machine work at a local shop. Not necessarily required, but again, you can argue some of this, and depending on what we're dealing with, it's a nuanced topic. But suffice to say, the Fertittas, non-union people. They were on the crap list for the culinary workers because they won't hire union people for any of their casinos and hotels in Vegas. That's actually why the UFC was kept out of New York for so long. Culinary Union is a very powerful lobby in New York, and they don't like the Fertittas, so they were just kind of giving them the middle finger for a long time. But, anyway, moving on a little bit from that. But so there was always a little bit more of a bent towards, again, not necessarily organized labor. And organized labor has, for better and for worse, sided mostly with the Democrats. Sometimes it's been completely valid, understandable, and justified. Sometimes it makes me roll my eyes and look at union leadership going, what the heck are you doing other than lining your own pockets? Unions should not have, my opinion. I actually, the fact that several unions came out and supported Trump in the last election, I thought was a good thing just to shake up the status quo a little bit. Get one side of the aisle not to take you for granted. Both sides, you have to earn votes. Never mind. Another thing about the American political system. Moving on. But so Dana White probably always had a slight bent more towards the conservative side. Not huge, but maybe a slight leaning. Then COVID. And he got real pissy about that and the way that was handled, not unfairly. And if you look at which side of the political aisle was more accommodating to the UFC, you can argue how accommodating they were towards actual reality. I'm not here to say one way or the other. Different states have different considerations for that. Florida opened up a lot sooner and had some, but your considerations in Florida are not the same as the considerations in New York or California or here. And I take serious issue with how COVID was handled here in Utah, but decided to re-elect that jackass. Again, not going into it, sorry. Point being, the right wing of the American political system was more accommodating towards the UFC when the UFC really needed it. So the UFC started leaning a bit more that way. And you know what? Again, that's not crazy to try and understand. The UFC had needs. Various Republican sides were, people on the Republican side of things were sympathetic, worked with them, while the left wing got real crazy and real pissy about it. And that just kind of, before the UFC even really started weighing in on this, that's kind of what was seen by the fan base. And then, then the insanity started, but the point being, the UFC actually has kind of a relationship to its fans. There's a lot of people who were just fans of the UFC, not of particular fighters. That used to be a big thing back in the day. Well, some of you guys may have been around long enough to remember that. Some of you maybe not. But that relationship to the fans is actually what's driven a lot of their goodwill. It's what's driven a lot of the way people continue to think about them, the way a giant chunk of the fan base still will take the UFC's side over just about anything. The PFL doesn't have a... Sorry, let me finish my point there. People have started realizing that there is that relationship. Other sports leagues and other sports teams have tried kind of to do what the UFC does in terms of like maybe leaning one way or the other on a social issue or towards a political side. Their fan bases tend to reject it, largely because they don't actually have much of a relationship to the fans. Different teams, this goes a little bit differently, right? Some teams in some locations, actually, those organizations do have a good relationship with the local fan base. But it's local, not national, and it varies a lot. The UFC has a good relationship with its fan base, and that led a lot of younger men towards more right-side politics. And people started asking, like, well, okay, what can the left make inroads with UFC fans? Or, young men. And the biggest problem the left has with this, the left does not have a relationship with young men. It just doesn't. You might get some that feel guilted or persuaded by some arguments. Mostly it's a minority. Most of them are in college. And most of them are bitter about not getting student debt relief because why did I go into 6 figures worth of debt for a useless degree that doesn't actually translate to something that'll pay me in the real world? But that's about the educational system and not quite the same thing. Anyway, there's no relationship there. The Democrat, this was the whole thing, like, where's the Joe Rogan of the left? Well, one, Joe Rogan used to be left-leaning. He's not as much anymore, but he absolutely used to be. Dude endorsed Bernie Sanders and Andrew Yang. Like, you can see his views shift over time, but let's not pretend as much as we can't, pretend he's not where he is right now, worldview-wise, you can't pretend he didn't start where he started either. He's not always been this way. He's shifted. And he has a relationship to his audience, good, bad, or otherwise, and the left doesn't really have a relationship to young men in particular. It's a problem for them. They need to address it. But a lot of them saw that the UFC had a relationship with young men and went, hey, how can we kind of do this? And the answer is you have to foster a relationship with the audience. Full stop. If you don't have a relationship with them, you're not going to get them to listen. This is true of everyone, as a general rule. Even if some of these relationships are appropriately distant. I mean, how to phrase this? I have never met any of the, okay, so I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I've never met the prophet. I've never met any of his counselors. I've never met any of the current Quorum of the 12 Apostles. My relationship with them, I don't have a parasocial one. I don't, think we're buddies. I've never met them. But I do have a relationship to them. It's appropriate. And it's one of the reasons there's a lot of reasons for why I believe what I believe and how I conduct myself, and I'm not going to go into detail. But so you can foster an appropriate relationship. You don't need to be best friends with everybody. And people on the right wing has done a decent job of this. I may not be your best friend. I may never know you, but I speak to things that you seem to care about. Here's my stance on them. We can talk it out. Come meet me at an event. Maybe we can shake hands. You can ask questions. That kind of thing. And this fosters a relationship between, leadership and labor, if you want to put it that way. And there was a lot of how can, the political left start, get the attention and make their case to young men in particular who feel really disenfranchised. And the answer is you have to build a relationship with them. Good luck. There's tools to do that. I'm not going to go into that here. And to bring this back to the actual point, the UFC has a relationship with its fans. Dana White's out there frequently. He's not as much as he used to, but Dana's a pretty big personality. And there was a long time when Dana would talk to fans. Sometimes it was through media outlets, but he did a lot of stuff that was talking to fans, that was addressing fan concerns, talking about those things, and the PFL doesn't have a relationship to the MMA fan base. They put out MMA content and just assume that MMA fans will watch. Maybe a segment will, but Don Davis and the PFL have a better relationship with people they're trying to suck money out of as investments than they do the actual fans. You have to get a relationship with the fans to really make this work. I'm rooting for the PFL. But when was the last... They don't do media. When was the last time they had Francis Ngannou do a thing? They had Sean O'Connell ahead of this PFL, ahead of PFL 1 for 2025. Sean O'Connell went on Ariel Helwani's show. That's it. And he expressed some of his frustration, some of PFL management frustrations with the fans and the media. Is a lot of what he did. And I'm not saying you can't do that. Expressing some of those frustrations is fine. But, man, they are just not good about fostering and cultivating a relationship with the fans. It's taken for granted that they will come over and watch. Not how that works, guys. Not how that works. All right. That is my soapbox for that. Again, rooting for the PFL. I thought their card on the 3rd. Right? I actually thought it was pretty good. So, more of that, please. I am rooting for you. When I criticize, it's not me saying you suck and I wish for you to fail. It's me saying this kind of sucks, or I don't like this and I want you to do better. So, please continue to go. Please continue to succeed. Really am rooting for you in that respect. Okay. I maybe should have talked about this earlier in the rundown, but let me close with this. We're going to do plugs and figure that stuff out. So, Carlos Prates was supposed to fight Jeff Neal at UFC 314. That fell apart. Instead, was it 314 that was originally? I feel like it was. Yeah. So that fell apart. Issue with Jeff Neal. Instead, Prates has been moved to main event the April 26th card in Kansas City, Missouri. And in stepping to face him will be Ian Machado Garry. Garry taking another almost inadvisably short fight. Look, I actually kind of like Garry's chances here. I think a lot of his style lines up well with Prates. I think his size for the division will probably give Prates some problems. But one, I'm rooting for Prates because I think he's awesome. But 5 rounds on kind of short notice for Garry. Garry's still young enough to kind of make that work. I have no problems with this fight. I really do kind of wish it was more on a full camp, but something fell apart. I really liked the Jeff Neal fight for Prates. I thought it was a reasonable escalation. This might be a bit too much for him too soon. That said, we shall see. It's a really good fight. I am not at all. I don't have a problem with that being the main event. How is that card? Oh, dear heavens. Anthony Smith is the co-main event. Against Zhang Ming Yang, Giga Chikadze and David Onama's a decent fight. I don't care. Michel Pereira and Abu Smagomedov. That is the battle of who can do something wild enough in the first 90 seconds, because they're both going to gas out. Andre Muniz and Ekram Alaskarov is a decent fight. Okay, we got a pretty decent card here. It's a long card, though. Jeez. Why is Chelsea Chandler still in the UFC? Ugh. Not all good. But that's not a bad card for a fight night. They're on ESPN for that. And they had to sell tickets, so they had to put some effort into it. Not a bad card. But, yeah, so Prates and Garry, about the best you were probably going to be able to make. You know what? Whatever else you want to say about Garry, and I have said before plenty, and I probably will say plenty in the future, at this point in his career, he is not ducking anything. He is under no obligation to accept this fight on this timetable. You know what? And he's not a lot of people lining up to fight Carlos Prates on short notice, and he said yes. So you know what? That dude wants the smoke, as the kids say. All right, that's all I got for my notes here. I hope I didn't miss anything. I'm gonna check the old social, see if anything crazy is broken. If not, we'll do plugs and get out of here. Oh, okay. Hang on. Yes, minor note, because I have the opportunity for alliteration in my note on my time down on the rundown. Conor McGregor launched a crypto coin, never got off the ground. Needed to have like $1 million or so to start. Couldn't raise it. Failed miserably. One, I hope more people realize that crypto is kind of a scam. Crypto's a weird field. It really is. It's kind of just an unregulated security thing at the moment, but Conor trying to do that, just it failing so miserably, amuses me to no freaking end. So I have to throw that in there. Okay. Yeah, that's a thing that happened. Okay, let me just check again real fast. Yeah, I don't think I have anything else here. Apparently we have brought dire wolves back from extinction. You know what? That's one, terrifying. Two, kind of cool. All right. Yeah, I'm gonna leave it. I'm gonna leave things there. So, All right. Plugs. What do we got? I'm going to be reviewing the Minecraft movie with Mark Radulich on Damn You Hollywood today, Monday, as I record this. So hopefully you'll listen to that. I was busy last week. I covered WWE SmackDown on Friday, UFC on ESPN 65 on Saturday, then AEW's Dynasty on Sunday. If you're interested in my coverage over there, go give those reads in the wrestling and MMA zones respectively. This week is SmackDown, and again, I will have a write-up for 314. I will not be covering it live, so give the report a read after the fact. Thank you very much for that. I appreciate it. Um, Anything else? No, that's not till next week or so. All right, I think that's it for me. All right, thank you all again. I apologize for this being, much later than usual, but life. I do what I can, but this is a thing I do because I enjoy doing it and not because I get paid to do it. So occasionally it has to take a back seat to other enterprises in my life. All right, that's it for me for this week. Thank you all very, very much again. See you next week to review 314, and I believe we have a preview. Oh yeah, actually we're previewing the Garry and Prates card. So come back for that. Till then, thank you again. Stay safe out there and continue to be well, be safe, and behave.